Before the storm, the spark of the Great War. In the early 20th century, Europe looked strong from the outside. The cities of Paris, Berlin, Vienna, and London were alive with progress, science, and culture. But beneath the surface, a storm was silently building. Nations were not just neighbors, they were rivals. The great powers of Europe were divided into two dangerous camps. On one side stood the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. On the other side stood the Triple Entente: France, Russia, and Britain. It was like a chessboard, where each move of one power threatened the other. Nationalism was at its peak. The French still dreamed of taking back Alsace-Lorraine from Germany, a wound from the War of 1871. In the East, Slavic people wanted independence from Austria-Hungary, and Serbia felt destined to lead them. Meanwhile, Germany was racing Britain in building battleships, each side trying to dominate the seas. It was an age of pride, paranoia, and preparation. The world didn't know it yet, but all these tensions were waiting for a single spark, and that spark came in the city of Sarajevo. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, visited Sarajevo with his wife Sophie. To the Serbs, Austria-Hungary was an empire of oppression. A secret group known as the Black Hand plotted to strike a blow. That morning, an assassination attempt failed. The bomb missed. But fate had other plans. Later that day, as the Archduke's car made a wrong turn, one young man, Gavrilo Princip, just 19 years old, stood waiting with a pistol. He fired 2 shots. One struck Sophie, the other Franz Ferdinand. Within minutes, both were dead. The news spread like fire. Vienna was enraged. They saw this not just as a crime, but as a chance to crush Serbia once and for all. Germany stood behind Austria-Hungary, promising support, while Russia stepped forward to protect Serbia. France backed Russia, and Britain soon entered the stage. The world was trapped in a chain reaction. Within weeks, what should have been a local conflict turned into a global inferno. The age of peace was over. The Great War had begun. Into the trenches, the Western Front. By August 1914, Europe was at war. The armies marched with flags flying and bands playing. Many young men believed it would be a short, glorious fight. Home by Christmas, they said. But what awaited them was far darker than anyone imagined. Germany's plan was swift and bold. They wanted to crush France quickly by invading through Belgium, then turn east to fight Russia. But the invasion of Belgium brought Britain into the war, for Britain had promised to defend Belgian neutrality. Soon, the world's strongest empires were locked in battle. The first months were filled with movement, armies clashing at the Marne and the Yser. But when neither side could win, the war froze. From the coast of Belgium down to the Swiss border, soldiers dug into the earth, carving long lines of trenches. This was the birth of trench warfare. Life in the trenches was misery. Mud, rats, lice, and the constant fear of death haunted the soldiers. When rain fell, the trenches flooded. The air smelled of gunpowder, decay, and sickness. And above the trenches stretched a deadly zone, no man's land, where barbed wire, machine guns, and artillery made every step a gamble with death. Both sides tried to break the stalemate with massive offensives. In 1916 came the Battle of Verdun. The German army launched a storm of shells, vowing to bleed France white. The French defended with the cry, "They shall not pass." Verdun became a furnace. 10 months of horror, hundreds of thousands dead, and yet no clear victor. That same year, the British and French tried to break through at the Battle of the Somme. On the very first day, 60,000 British soldiers fell, killed or wounded, the worst day in British military history. The Somme dragged on for months, leaving over 1 million casualties. But still, the trenches held. It was a new kind of war, industrial, mechanical, and merciless. Machine guns cut men down like grass. Artillery destroyed entire landscapes. Poison gas burned lungs and blinded eyes. Tanks made their first appearance, slow and clumsy, but a glimpse of the future. The Western Front became a graveyard of illusions. The dream of a quick war had died. What remained was a long nightmare. Years of blood, mud, and sorrow. The war beyond Europe, a global inferno. While the Western Front drowned in mud and blood, the war was spreading far beyond Europe. This was no longer a European conflict. It was becoming a global war. In 1914, the Ottoman Empire entered the war on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary. The Ottoman leaders hoped to regain lost glory and protect their empire. Soon, the Middle East became a new battlefield. The Allies tried to break the Ottomans at the Gallipoli campaign in 1915. British, Australian, and New Zealand troops landed on the rugged Turkish coast, hoping for a quick victory. Instead, they met fierce Ottoman resistance under the command of a rising officer, Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk. After months of slaughter and no success, the Allies withdrew. Gallipoli was a disaster for them, but a source of pride for the Ottomans. Meanwhile, in the deserts of Arabia, another struggle was taking shape. Arab nationalists, tired of Ottoman rule, joined hands with the British. With the help of the legendary figure T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, Arab tribes launched guerrilla attacks, blowing up railways and ambushing Ottoman forces. The Middle East was now fully pulled into the war. Far away in Africa and Asia, the war touched colonies too. African soldiers were recruited to fight in Europe. In India, over 1 million men served the British Army, fighting in France, Mesopotamia, and East Africa. From Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, troops crossed oceans to fight in distant lands. For many of them, this was not their war, but they paid its price with blood. The seas became another battlefield. Germany's powerful submarines, U-boats, roamed the Atlantic, sinking ships that supplied Britain. Civilian vessels were not spared. In 1915, the British liner Lusitania was torpedoed, killing nearly 200 passengers, including Americans. Shock and outrage spread, pushing the United States closer to involvement. By 1917, the war had become truly worldwide. Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and the oceans, all burned in the fire of the Great War. What began as an assassination in Sarajevo had turned into a conflict of nations and empires across the globe, and the storm was still growing. The endgame, collapse and consequences. By 1917, the world was exhausted. Millions were dead, cities destroyed, and yet no side had won. But change was coming, both on the battlefield and beyond. The biggest turning point came with the United States. For years, America had stayed neutral, watching Europe burn from afar. But Germany's submarine warfare and the infamous Zimmermann telegram, a secret German offer to Mexico to attack the U.S., changed everything. In April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. Fresh troops, fresh weapons, and fresh money began pouring into Europe. The balance was about to shift. At the same time, inside Russia, revolution exploded. The suffering of war, hunger, and anger against the Tsar brought the empire to collapse. In 1917, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, seized power and promised peace, land, and bread. Russia signed a separate peace with Germany, leaving the Eastern Front silent. But this allowed Germany to move its troops westward for one final gamble. In 1918, Germany launched the Spring Offensive, pouring everything into a last attempt to win before American forces arrived in full strength. For a moment, it seemed they might break through. But the Allies, now reinforced by American soldiers, pushed back. The tide had turned. By summer 1918, Germany was retreating. Its allies, Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, were collapsing under pressure and internal revolts. Bulgaria surrendered. The Ottomans signed an armistice. Austria-Hungary fractured into pieces. New nations were born out of its ruins. Inside Germany, hunger and despair turned to revolt. Sailors mutinied, workers marched, and the Kaiser fled into exile. On November 11, 1918, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns finally fell silent. The Great War was over. But peace did not come easily. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was signed. Germany was blamed for the war, forced to pay crushing reparations, and stripped of territory and military power. For many Germans, it felt less like peace and more like humiliation. Seeds of resentment were planted, seeds that would grow into another, even more terrible war. The First World War left a scar across the world. Empires fell: the Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and German. Millions lay dead, millions more wounded or displaced. The hope of a quick, glorious fight had ended in mud, fire, and grief. The world had entered the modern age of total war. And though the guns were silent in 1918, the echoes of the Great War would shape the 20th century. The end. World War II.